The African sun blazed down mercilessly on the vast plains of Addo Elephant National Park, South Africa. The air shimmered with heat, the dry wind whistled like a warning, and the ground beneath every step was cracked like broken glass. It was the peak of the dry season, a time when survival was a cruel game for every creature in the reserve. The rivers that once carved their way through the land had long since vanished, leaving only dusty channels. What little water remained clung desperately in shallow puddles, guarded by thirsty animals, and fought over in silence. The smell of dust, sweat, and decay hung heavy in the air. And in this desolate wilderness, there was a giant who was suffering. An adult elephant bull, strong in his prime years, limped painfully across the barren earth. His massive body, usually a symbol of majesty and power, now looked weakened, almost fragile. Each step sent a tremor of agony through his body. His right front foot was grotesquely swollen, the skin stretched taut over a deep, angry red abscess. The wound pulsed with infection, and every movement sent waves of fire up his leg. His ears drooped low, flapping weakly, not in dominance or communication, but in exhaustion. His once bright eyes had grown dull and sunken, filled with a kind of sadness that seemed too heavy for even a giant to carry. Days earlier, he had tried to keep pace with his herd. Elephants are creatures of family and loyalty, but when food and water become scarce, survival instincts often force even the strongest bonds to break. Slowly, painfully, this bull had fallen behind, step by agonizing step, until the herd disappeared into the horizon, leaving him a solitary shadow on the empty plains. Now he was a lost soul, stranded in a hostile land. The pool of desperation. By chance, he stumbled upon a shallow puddle, not much more than muddy water clinging to the earth. It was not enough to quench his thirst, but it became his refuge. Here he would stand, lowering his trunk to sip a few droplets, then retreat back into stillness. The air was thick with the scent of dry earth and sweat. A hot wind swept over him, carrying with it the taste of dust and despair. The bull shifted uncomfortably, trying to take weight off his infected foot. He let out a low rumble, not of communication, but of pain and loneliness. Flies swarmed in clouds around the wound, feeding on the open flesh. He tried to flap his ears, tried to swing his trunk, but the insects were relentless. The abscess throbbed, oozing pus, attracting more and more pests that only worsened his suffering. Here was an elephant, who had once towered over the land with pride, reduced now to a shadow of himself, a giant brought down by pain. The bird, and then from the silence of the dry air came movement. A black bird swooped down, landing near the elephant's massive foot. Its feathers shimmered faintly in the sun, and its long, curved beak twitched with curiosity. It hopped closer, tilting its head, observing the swollen flesh with the sharp eyes of a survivor. The elephant noticed, but he did not move. He was too weak to chase it away, too broken to care. The bird stepped even closer, studying the abscess. Then, suddenly, it struck. Its beak pecked sharply at the swollen skin. The elephant jolted, letting out a thunderous bellow of surprise, dust rising from the ground as he stamped his other foot. But the deed was done. The abscess split open, and a foul yellow liquid spilled onto the earth. The pain was sharp, but almost instantly there was relief. The pressure that had been building inside his foot was lessened. For the first time in weeks, he shifted his weight and felt a reduction in the stabbing agony. The bird pecked again, releasing more pus, more tension. It was grotesque, it was messy, but it was also salvation. The elephant lifted his trunk gently, waving it as if in thanks. The bird chirped softly then, with a final glance spread its wings and disappeared into the sky. For the first time in a long while, the elephant felt the faint flicker of hope. That night, under the cool African sky, he rested longer than he had in weeks. He believed, perhaps naively, that he had been saved. The return of the infection. But nature is not always merciful. Just days later, the wound grew worse. The swelling returned, larger and more violent. The skin turned dark red, the pus, foul-smelling, leaking constantly. Flies swarmed in endless clouds. The elephant could no longer stand for long. His body weakened, his strength wasted away. He became trapped by the puddle, drinking what little water remained, unable to wander, unable to forage. Hunger hollowed his body, His ribs began to show beneath his thick skin. His breathing grew ragged, each exhale heavy, echoing across the silence of the dry plains. By the time the puddle had nearly dried, he was a ghost of his former self. His massive frame lay half-collapsed near the mud, trunk limp on the ground, eyelashes fluttering weakly in the scorching heat. The flies consumed him, the sun burned him, the earth around him steamed. He was alone, dying. And then, just when the wilderness seemed ready to claim him forever, came the sound of human voices. The Rangers. At dawn, 2 men patrolled the reserve, David Machona and Samuel Kumalo, Rangers of Addo. Their job was simple yet vital, to check the few remaining water holes, monitor the wildlife, and look for signs of distress. From afar, Samuel spotted something unusual, a gray mass slumped near the edge of a drying pool. At first, it looked like a boulder or the shadow of a dead tree. But as they approached, the truth revealed itself. It was an elephant, and it was barely alive. David dropped to his knees beside the giant, placing a hand on its trunk. The elephant's skin was hot and dry. Its breathing was labored, chest rising and falling in painful rhythm. The infected foot oozed pus, reeking of decay. "He's suffering," David whispered, his voice heavy with grief. Samuel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio, calling for emergency support. His words cut through static. "We have a downed bull elephant, severe abscess, near collapse. We need medical team and transport, urgent." David poured clean water slowly into the elephant's trunk, coaxing it to drink. The bull stirred, weakly pulling the liquid in, swallowing with difficulty. Samuel tied a rope around the area, marking it to keep predators away. The 2 rangers worked silently, every movement filled with urgency, but also with deep respect for the giant before them. From the horizon, the low growl of an engine broke the silence. The specialized rescue vehicle was coming. For the first time in weeks, the dying elephant had a chance. The rumble of the rescue vehicle grew louder, rolling across the dry plains like a promise of hope. Dust rose in the golden morning air as the team arrived. Veterinarians, nurses, and wildlife specialists all trained for moments like this. Yet, even with their expertise, the sight of the elephant lying helpless in the mud made each of them pause. The bull was immense. His wrinkled gray body sprawled across the earth like a fallen mountain. His breathing was harsh and uneven, his eyes half closed in exhaustion. The infected foot was swollen grotesquely, oozing pus, a sickening odor spreading into the air. David stepped forward, his voice steady but low. "Easy, boy, you're safe now." The elephant stirred at the sound, lifting his trunk weakly as though he understood. The lift. The team worked quickly. Tarps were spread under the bull's massive body. Ropes tightened with practiced precision. A hydraulic crane attached to the truck whirred as it carefully began to lift the animal. Every creak of the rope, every groan of the machinery seemed to echo across the plains. The elephant let out a low, rumbling cry, not of anger but of fear and pain. Samuel knelt beside his head, one hand on the trunk, whispering softly. "Stay strong, great one. We've got you." Slowly, with great effort, the bull was lifted onto the vehicle. The truck was reinforced and padded with straw to reduce pressure points. Once secured, the team climbed aboard. Samuel stayed at the elephant's side, monitoring his breathing, while David rode ahead to prepare the station for emergency treatment. As the truck moved, the bull's trunk occasionally reached out, brushing against Samuel's hand, a fragile reminder that the giant was still holding on. The examination. At the ranger station, the elephant was carefully guided down a wooden ramp into a sheltered barn. The roof blocked the blistering sun, and the floor was covered with dry straw. A large bin of hay and a tank of fresh water were placed nearby, close enough for him to reach without strain. The veterinarian, Dr. Lindiwe Mokuhina, examined the wound with practiced calm. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the swollen foot. "The infection is bad," she said softly, "but it hasn't reached the bone. That means we have a chance." The team moved with precision. First, the wound was flushed with liters of sterile water, washing away the thick pus. The foul smell filled the barn, but no one flinched. Dead tissue was carefully cut away, revealing raw, inflamed flesh beneath. The bull rumbled in discomfort, but painkillers and sedatives eased his suffering. Antibiotics were injected directly into his bloodstream, fighting the infection that had nearly claimed his life. Finally, the wound was packed with sterile gauze, wrapped securely with thick bandages. For the first time in weeks, the elephant lay in a place of safety. Days of healing. The days that followed were a careful balance of science and compassion. Each morning, rangers and medical staff cleaned the wound, replaced the bandages, and checked his temperature. At night, they rotated shifts to monitor his breathing. When he stirred restlessly, Samuel often sat beside him, whispering comfort until he stilled again. The bull's appetite slowly returned. At first, he only nibbled on hay, but soon he accepted sweet fruits and fresh vegetables offered by the staff. Every sip of water, every mouthful of food was a victory. On the third day, the swelling began to recede. The foul odor that had clung to the barn disappeared. His breathing grew steadier, his eyes brighter. David and Samuel exchanged hopeful smiles as they watched him shift weight onto his injured foot for the first time without collapsing. "Look at him," David murmured. "He's fighting back." Regaining strength. By the end of the first week, the bull was strong enough to stand for longer periods. His massive body no longer trembled under its own weight. He moved slowly, but his steps were steadier each day. The veterinarians increased his diet, adding more fruits, roots, and greens. With every meal, his frame filled out, muscles regaining the strength they had lost. His skin, once dull and cracked, began to shine in the sunlight that streamed into the barn each morning. Samuel often led him into a small yard just outside the station. There the bull basked in the sun, lifting his head high, ears flapping in delight. Rangers sprayed cool water over his back, and the giant responded with low rumbles of pleasure, trunk raised to the sky. The once-dying elephant was returning to life. A bond forged in survival. Though the staff cared for him as a team, it was clear the bull formed a special bond with David and Samuel. When they entered the barn, he lifted his trunk in recognition. When Samuel spoke, the elephant stilled, listening as though the ranger's voice was an anchor. It was more than gratitude, it was trust. A bridge had been built between man and animal, fragile yet profound. Each night as the sun dipped behind the hills, David and Samuel would linger longer than necessary, watching the giant rest peacefully. In saving him, they had found something within themselves too, a reminder of why they had chosen this life. The return. After a month of careful healing, the wound was closed, the infection gone. The elephant's strength had returned. His steps were firm, his eyes alive with the spark of the wild. It was time. The team prepared the special transport vehicle once more. The bull climbed the ramp with surprising ease, guided by gentle hands and calm voices. Inside the truck, he swayed slightly, but his trunk lifted, inhaling the familiar scents of grass and dust carried on the wind. The journey back to the plains was quiet. The rangers did not speak much. Words felt unnecessary. Each knew that what they were about to witness was more than a release. It was a return. When the doors of the vehicle opened, golden sunlight spilled across the landscape. The elephant stepped out slowly, pausing to taste the air. The scent of dry grass, the warmth of the earth beneath his feet, the endless horizon, it was all his again. He lifted his trunk high and released a deep, resonant roar. It echoed across the plains, a declaration of survival, of freedom. Reunion. In the distance, shadows moved, the silhouettes of other elephants. A herd approached slowly, their calls carrying across the grassland. The bull froze, ears wide, trunk raised. Recognition sparked in his eyes. He rumbled deeply, answering their call. Then, with strength and determination, he began to walk. Not limping, not staggering, but striding forward. As the herd drew nearer, smaller elephants trumpeted in greeting. One young calf rushed ahead, circling him with joyous squeals. The bull paused, his trunk lowering gently to touch the calf's head in a gesture of For weeks he had been a ghost, abandoned and broken. Now he was home. The legacy. David and Samuel stood side by side, watching as the bull disappeared into the distance, merging once more with the herd. Their faces carried quiet smiles, not of triumph, but of peace. "Think he'll remember us?" Samuel asked softly. David's eyes followed the giant as he grew smaller against the horizon. Maybe not with words, but in his heart, yes, he'll remember. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with brilliant streaks of orange and pink. The land seemed softer, warmer, as though the wilderness itself had acknowledged what had happened. The story of this bull, his suffering, his bird companion, his human saviors, would be told and retold around fires, in ranger camps, in the whispers of guides to visitors of Addo. It was a reminder that even in the harshest corners of nature, kindness can forge miracles. The elephant's roar lingered faintly on the wind, a sound that seemed to carry both farewell and gratitude. And somewhere deep within the vast wilderness of Addo, a healed giant walked free, his place in the wild restored, his bond with humanity unbroken.